Welcome to my channel. Here, we share inspiring stories of brave and strong people. Maybe you'll see yourself or someone you know in these stories. Thank you for watching. Shadow Creek wasn't just another small town. Beneath its dusty streets and faded buildings lay secrets. Ones buried in the crumbling tunnels of an old copper mine. When Deputy Elena Cruz brought Alex Morgan to Shadow Creek's darker side, the air grew heavy with revelations. Human trafficking, drug smuggling, and corruption stretched from the sheriff's office to the cartel's enforcers. The town had been swallowed by its own shadow, and its people were too terrified to fight back. But Alex wasn't afraid. She'd seen worse, done worse. As she stood at the mine's mouth, its black maw threatening to consume her, she knew one thing. She couldn't leave without taking the fight to the darkness itself. Leave a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. If you enjoy stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey tomorrow. The desert stretched endlessly before Alex Morgan, the late afternoon sun casting a golden haze over the arid landscape. Her Kawasaki Ninja hummed steadily beneath her, the vibrations familiar and grounding as she followed the cracked highway toward a place she'd only seen on a map. The road was deserted, the horizon blending into the heat waves that shimmered off the asphalt. Shadow Creek appeared on the edge of her vision like a mirage. Its low rooftops and dusty streets gave the impression of a town forgotten by time, where the world's progress had passed by without a second glance. The town's sign, faded and riddled with bullet holes, welcomed her with reluctant hospitality. Welcome to Shadow Creek, population 2.134. Alex slowed her motorcycle as she approached the gas station, the only sign of activity in the otherwise desolate town. The building was small and weathered, with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that read, Harper's Gas, last stop for 50 miles. A single pump stood outside, its casing dented and rusted, as if it had withstood more than just the elements. She pulled into the station and cut the engine, the sudden silence leaving her ears buzzing. Dismounting, she removed her helmet, her sharp green eyes taking in every detail. The faint smell of oil and gasoline lingered in the air, mingling with the dry, earthy scent of the desert. Sam Harper emerged from the station's office, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag. He was a lean man in his 60s, with deep lines etched into his sun-weathered face. His cautious gaze swept over Alex as she approached, his demeanor polite but wary. "Afternoon," he greeted, his voice gravelly from years of hard living. "Need a fill-up?" Alex nodded, handing him cash as she surveyed the area. "Yeah. Looks like a quiet place." Sam let out a dry chuckle. "Quiet enough. Until it's not." He set to work pumping the gas, his movements efficient but tense. Alex noticed how his eyes kept darting toward the road, as if he were expecting someone. She said nothing, her instincts alert to the subtle signs of unease. Years of military training had honed her ability to read people, and Sam's body language spoke volumes. "This your first time in Shadow Creek?" Sam asked, his tone casual but edged with curiosity. "First time," Alex replied, keeping her own tone neutral. "Just passing through." Sam nodded, but his expression didn't relax. He glanced over his shoulder toward the open highway, his jaw tightening slightly. Before Alex could press him further, the faint hum of engines reached her ears. She turned toward the road, her eyes narrowing as 3 motorcycles appeared in the distance. The riders approached with a low, menacing rumble that grew louder as they neared. Each bike bore the emblem of the Desert Wolves, a snarling wolf's head painted on their fuel tanks. The lead rider, A tall man with a scar running from his temple to his jawline. Had an air of authority that radiated danger. His leather vest bore the name Dagger in bold, jagged letters. The bikers pulled into the station, their engines roaring before cutting off almost simultaneously. The sudden silence felt oppressive, heavy with unspoken tension. Dagger dismounted first, his boots crunching against the gravel as he strode toward Sam. "Harper," he drawled, his voice low and dripping with condescension. "You missed our meeting last week." Sam's shoulders stiffened, but he stood his ground. "Told you before. I'm not interested in your kind of business. This is my station, and I run it my way." Dagger's smirk widened, but there was no humor in it. "Your station's on our turf, old man. That means you follow our rules, or you pay the price." Alex stayed where she was, her arms crossed as she observed the exchange. Her eyes flicked to the other two bikers, who leaned casually against their motorcycles, their hands resting too comfortably near the knives and chains hanging from their belts. It was a scene she had witnessed countless times in different forms, predators feeding on fear. "Leave him alone," Alex said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. All eyes turned to her. Dagger's smirk faltered for a moment before returning, this time tinged with amusement. "And who might you be?" "Just someone who doesn't like bullies," Alex replied evenly. Her tone was calm, but her stance was deliberate, projecting a quiet confidence. The two other bikers exchanged glances, one of them letting out a low chuckle. "You're barking up the wrong tree, lady," the larger one said, his voice dripping with mockery. Dagger raised a hand to silence him, his eyes narrowing as he studied Alex. "You got guts. I'll give you that. But guts don't mean much when you're outnumbered." Alex tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Outnumbered doesn't mean outmatched." Dagger's amusement vanished, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "You've got a big mouth. Let's see if you've got the skills to back it up." The tension snapped like a coiled spring. Dagger lunged toward her, his hand reaching for the knife at his side. But Alex was faster. She sidestepped smoothly, grabbing his wrist and twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the ground as Dagger let out a grunt of pain. Before the other bikers could react, Alex turned her attention to them, her voice cold and commanding. "Stay where you are." Something in her tone, or perhaps the sight of their leader being disarmed so quickly, made them hesitate. Dagger stumbled back, cradling his wrist and glaring at Alex with a mix of fury and disbelief. "You'll regret this," he snarled, his voice low and venomous. Alex picked up the knife and examined it briefly before tossing it to the ground at his feet. "Maybe. But not today." The bikers exchanged uncertain glances before Dagger motioned for them to follow. They mounted their motorcycles and roared away, their retreat marked by a cloud of dust and the growl of engines. As the sound faded, Alex turned to find Sam staring at her, a mixture of relief and astonishment on his face. He let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "Lady, you just poked a hornet's nest." Alex shrugged, her expression unreadable. "Wouldn't be the first time." Dagger Malone stormed down the steps of the gas station's office, his movements jerky with frustration. His two gang members lingered near the bikes, their eyes flicking between Alex and their leader. One of them, a burly man with a faded wolf tattoo on his neck, took a hesitant step forward but stopped when Dagger threw up a hand to silence him. The air around Harper's gas station felt thicker now, as though the earlier confrontation had left a tangible residue. Alex stood by the pump, her posture relaxed but her mind alert, tracking every twitch of the gang members' movements. Years of training had honed her ability to calculate threats, and she didn't need words to know that Dagger was far from finished. You've got guts. Lady, Dagger said, his voice sharp and cold. He flexed his injured wrist. The earlier encounter clearly still fresh in his mind. But guts don't mean you're smart. And empty threats don't mean you're dangerous. Alex replied evenly, her voice calm but carrying an undertone of warning. Dagger's lips curled into a snarl. But before he could respond, Sam Harper stepped out from behind the counter inside the office. He held a shotgun loosely in one hand, though his grip and the way he positioned himself said he'd used it before. That's enough, Sam said, his voice firm. I've had just about enough of your kind making threats around here. Harper, Dagger began, his tone dripping with mockery. This ain't your fight. You'd be smart to stay out of it before things get messy. Sam's eyes narrowed. Messy or not, this is my station. You've made your point, now it's time for you to leave. The tension between them was electric. A silent standoff as Dagger weighed his options. His two gang members shifted uneasily, their hands hovering near their weapons but not quite committed to drawing them. They were testing the waters, unsure if the presence of the shotgun had tilted the scales. You think a rusty old shotgun and some wannabe hero are enough to scare me off? Dagger spat, motioning toward Alex with a flick of his hand. She's just passing through. She'll be gone tomorrow. And then it'll just be you and your little toy. Alex's expression didn't change, but her voice carried a weight that made even Dagger's bravado falter. If you're so confident, why don't you test that theory now? The wolf-tattooed biker chuckled nervously. Dagger, maybe we should just... Shut it, Dagger snapped, cutting his man off. He took a step closer to Alex, his face twisted with frustration and barely contained rage. You think this is over? You don't know who you're dealing with. Alex's gaze didn't waver. Then maybe it's time you showed me. For a moment, it seemed like Dagger might take the bait. But the sound of a truck rumbling down the highway drew his attention. The gang leader's head swiveled toward the approaching vehicle, his sneer deepening as he seemed to reconsider. He motioned for his men to mount their bikes. This ain't over, he said, his voice low and venomous. We'll be seeing you both again real soon. Sam didn't lower the shotgun until the Desert Wolves' engines roared to life and the trio disappeared back down the road. The fading growl of their motorcycles left a heavy silence in their wake, broken only by the sigh of relief that escaped Sam's lips. Well, that was about as pleasant as I expected, Sam muttered, setting the shotgun down carefully against the wall. He turned to Alex, his expression equal parts gratitude and concern. I don't know who you are, but you sure know how to pick your battles. Alex shrugged, brushing a strand of hair from her face. They seemed like they needed to be reminded of their place. Sam chuckled, though there was no humor in it. Reminding them's easy. Getting them to stay reminded, that's a whole other thing. He walked back into the station, gesturing for Alex to follow. The office was small and cluttered, the walls lined with faded posters advertising brands that likely hadn't existed in decades. A small fan hummed in the corner, doing little to combat the stifling heat. Sam leaned against the counter, his gaze steady on Alex. You really have no idea what you just stepped into, do you? I've got an idea, Alex replied, folding her arms. The Desert Wolves don't exactly scream subtlety. Sam shook his head. It's not just them. Shadow Creek, it's a different kind of place. Sheriff Kane's in their pocket, and the cartel's got its hands so deep in this town. We might as well be on their payroll. Alex frowned. The cartel? Sam nodded grimly. The Wolves are just their errand boys. They run the small-time operations, keep the locals in line. But the real power, that's coming from the copper mine outside town. You don't see it unless you know where to look. But it's there. Drugs. Guns. People, you name it. They're moving it through here. The weight of his words settled over Alex. But her expression remained unreadable. Why haven't you left? Sam snorted. Where am I gonna go? This station's been in my family for 40 years. Besides, someone's gotta stay and fight back. Even if it's just one old man and a rusty shotgun. Alex's lips curved into a faint smile. Well, now it's two of us. Sam stared at her for a long moment, as though trying to gauge her resolve. Finally, he nodded. You're either brave or crazy. Either way, I hope you know what you're doing. So do I, Alex said quietly, her gaze drifting toward the open door where the road stretched into the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, the faint growl of motorcycles echoed again. A reminder that the desert wolves weren't gone for good. Not yet. Alex was wiping down her motorcycle at the gas station. The lingering dust from Shadow Creek's dry air clinging stubbornly to the paint. The late afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows across the station's cracked concrete. She noticed a vehicle approaching in the distance, its headlights piercing through the haze of the desert heat. A dark SUV rolled into the lot, stopping just far enough to signal caution but not retreat. The door opened, and a woman in her early 30s stepped out. Her uniform identified her as a deputy, but it was her sharp gaze that gave away a deeper level of determination. Alex's instincts kicked in. This wasn't a routine visit. The deputy walked toward Alex, her boots crunching on the gravel. You're not from around here, she said, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity. That obvious? Alex replied, setting the rag down and giving the deputy her full attention. The woman nodded slightly. Shadow Creek doesn't see a lot of new faces. And when we do, they're usually not the type to stand up to the desert wolves. She extended a hand. Deputy Elena Cruz. Alex hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking her hand. Alex Morgan. Elena's handshake was firm, her eyes studying Alex as if trying to piece together a puzzle. I heard about what happened here earlier, she said, glancing toward the gas station office where Sam Harper stood watching from behind the counter. You stirred up quite a hornet's nest. Seemed like the right thing to do, Alex said, her tone neutral. Elena's lips curved into a faint smile. Right doesn't always mean easy. Or safe. She paused, her expression turning serious. Can we talk somewhere more private? Alex studied her for a moment, then nodded. Lead the way. Elena parked her SUV behind the gas station, out of sight from the main road. Alex followed her to a shaded area where a weathered picnic table sat beneath an old mesquite tree. The dry, brittle leaves barely offered respite from the relentless heat. But it was quiet. And that was enough. You're ex-military, aren't you? Elena asked as they sat down. Her tone was direct, but there was no accusation in it, only curiosity. Alex didn't flinch. Something like that. Elena leaned back, crossing her arms. Look, I'm not here to pry into your past, but I think someone with your skills might be able to help with something bigger than a few gangsters shaking down a gas station. Alex raised an eyebrow. And what's that? The copper mine, Elena said, her voice lowering. It's been running operations that don't make any sense. Increased security, strange shipments coming in at odd hours, and people disappearing. Locals. Mostly, people who don't have anyone to look for them. Alex's posture didn't change, but her expression sharpened. Disappearances? How long has this been going on? Months, Elena replied. At first, it was just rumors. Then I started noticing patterns. Families reporting loved ones missing. Vehicles seen heading toward the mine and never coming back. She sighed, rubbing her temples. I've tried to raise alarms. But Sheriff Kane, her voice trailed off, the frustration clear in her tone. Kane's not doing anything, Alex guessed. Elena's laugh was bitter. He's not just doing nothing, he's part of it. I've seen him meeting with guys I know are connected to the cartel. He keeps the heat off the mine while they run their operations. And anyone who gets too close to finding out the truth, well, they're the ones who disappear. The pieces were starting to form a clearer picture in Alex's mind. But she needed more. What do you think they're doing at the mine? I'm not sure yet, Elena admitted. But I've been watching it. There's something happening underground, literally. Trucks go in and out all the time. But they're not hauling ore. I've seen the crates. And I've seen the guards. Whatever's going on, it's bigger than just Shadow Creek. Alex leaned forward slightly. You said you've been watching. How close have you gotten? Elena hesitated. Then reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She handed it to Alex, who opened it to find satellite images of the mine and its surroundings. The photos were grainy but detailed enough to show key features: makeshift housing, armed guards stationed at key points, and what looked like shipping containers lined up near an entrance. These are from a friend who works in Border Patrol, Elena said. He's off the record on this, but he's as worried as I am. Those containers? They're modified for human transport. Alex's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the folder. The implications were clear. And they weren't good. Human trafficking, she said, her voice low. Elena nodded grimly. That's my theory. And if I'm right, the mine is just one piece of the puzzle. The cartel's using Shadow Creek as a hub, and Kane's letting them get away with it. Alex closed the folder and set it down. Why come to me? Because I can't do this alone, Elena said simply. And because I think you want to do more than just pass through. You didn't step in with the desert wolves because you felt like playing hero. You saw something you couldn't ignore. Am I wrong? Alex didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the sun was starting to dip below the mountains. The thought of staying in Shadow Creek wasn't part of her original plan. But then, plans had a way of changing. No, she said finally, her voice steady. You're not wrong. Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper despite their isolation. This goes deeper than what you've seen. The mine's just the tip of the iceberg. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her gallery until she found a set of images. Handing the phone to Alex, she explained. These were taken from a drone. It's not much, but it's enough to show they've fortified the area like a fortress. Armed guards, motion sensors, and checkpoints. It's not the kind of security you need for copper. Alex examined the photos closely. The layout of the mine was detailed, with each section marked with activity that didn't align with standard mining operations. Shipping containers were stacked along one side, their steel walls coated with dust and the scars of rough handling. Several vehicles, including black SUVs and armored trucks, were parked nearby. The containers, Alex said, pointing to them. You're sure they're modified for human transport? Elena nodded. My contact in Border Patrol confirmed it. They're equipped with vents and reinforced locks. They're not moving cargo in those. At least, not the kind you'd find on a manifest. Alex's eyes narrowed as she handed the phone back. You mentioned black SUVs near the mine. How often do you see them? Almost daily, Elena replied. They come and go at odd hours. Usually late at night. Always the same vehicles. No plates. I've tried running surveillance. But they're careful. Too careful. And the sheriff? Alex asked. Elena's jaw tightened. Kane's in deep. He's turned a blind eye to the wolves and their petty operations. But it's clear he's on the cartel's payroll. He keeps the deputies off their backs and ensures anyone asking questions gets shut down. If he's not directly involved, he's complicit enough to make no difference. Alex considered this. Her mind racing. The signs were clear: human trafficking, cartel operations, local law enforcement corruption. The pieces were falling into place. But the full picture still eluded her. Have you confronted him? Alex asked. Elena hesitated, then shook her head. Not directly. I've been careful. But I've raised concerns with other deputies I trust. They're scared. Alex. Scared of Kane. Scared of what the cartel might do if they push too hard. The last deputy who tried to investigate went missing. They found his car in a ditch 2 counties over. Empty. They're sending a message, Alex said. Her voice was calm, but the fire in her eyes betrayed her anger. Elena nodded. And it's working. Most people don't even talk about the mine anymore. It's like they've accepted it as part of life here. But I can't. I won't. Good, Alex said, her tone firm. Because neither will I. Elena's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise. You're staying? For now, Alex replied. You have evidence. And I have skills. But if we're going to take this on, we need a plan. Elena leaned forward, her voice urgent. We need to expose this. If we can get solid proof and take it to someone outside Kane's reach, maybe federal authorities, we might have a chance to shut this down. Then we start with surveillance. Alex said. You said the shipments happen at night. That's when we move. We gather intel, track their patterns, and find a weak point. I've got some equipment, Elena offered. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep us discreet. A couple of trail cameras, long-range mics. It's not military grade, but it'll do. Alex nodded. It'll have to. For now. Keep this between us. The fewer people who know, the safer we'll be. Agreed, Elena said. She paused, then added, Alex, I know you're stepping into this because it's the right thing to do. But these people, they're not like the wolves. The cartel doesn't play games. Neither do I. Alex replied simply. Elena studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. I'm starting to believe that. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation settling over them. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the desert. Somewhere in the distance, the faint rumble of an engine echoed, a reminder that their enemy never truly rested. We meet here tomorrow, Alex said finally. Same time. Bring the equipment. Elena nodded, her resolve hardening. Tomorrow. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The bell above the door chimed softly as Alex, Elena, and Sam entered Maria's diner. The smell of coffee and sizzling bacon greeted them, a comforting contrast to the oppressive tension lingering outside. The diner was small but well kept, its red leather booths and polished counter giving it a nostalgic charm. A few locals sat scattered around the room, their conversations quiet but watchful as the newcomers walked in. Maria Delgado stood behind the counter, her sharp eyes darting to the trio as they entered. She was a woman in her late 50s. Her gray-streaked hair pulled back into a no-nonsense bun, though she carried herself with an air of warmth. There was a guarded edge to her expression, as though she'd seen more than her fair share of trouble. "Afternoon, Maria," Sam greeted, his tone light but respectful. Maria's eyes softened slightly at the sight of him. "Sam Harper. It's been a while. Thought you'd forgotten about us here." Sam gave a small chuckle. Hard to forget the best pie in Shadow Creek. Maria's lips twitched into a brief smile before her gaze shifted to Alex and Elena. "Friends of yours?" "Something like that," Sam said, gesturing for Alex and Elena to join him at the counter. "Maria. This is Alex Morgan and Deputy Elena Cruz. We're here for more than pie today." Maria's brows knitted slightly as she wiped her hands on her apron. "What kind of trouble are you bringing into my diner, Sam?" Elena leaned forward, her voice calm but direct. "The kind that's already here, Maria. We're looking into the mine and the people running it." Maria's expression darkened, and she cast a quick glance around the diner to ensure no one was listening too closely. She motioned for them to follow her into the back. "Come on. We'll talk where it's quieter." The kitchen was warm, filled with the hum of old appliances and the scent of freshly baked bread. Maria closed the door behind them and folded her arms. "You're poking at a hornet's nest. You know that?" "We've noticed," Alex said, her tone steady. "But it's not stopping us." Maria studied her for a moment before sighing. "Fine. What do you want to know?" Elena spoke first. "What can you tell us about the mine? We know there's more going on there than mining." Maria's lips pressed into a thin line. "More than I'd like to know. The trucks, the guards, the black SUVs, it's all wrong. And people just vanish. Locals who have no one to stand up for them. I've seen the families come in here, begging for help. But there's nothing anyone can do." Alex frowned. "How long has this been happening?" "Years," Maria said. "But it's worse now. Ever since that man started showing up." "What man?" Alex asked, her voice sharpening. Maria hesitated, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to burst through it. "They call him the surgeon. Don't know his real name. But he's bad news. Cold. Calculating. He's the one pulling the strings now. Whenever he's in town, the mine's activity spikes. And the guards double." Elena's jaw tightened. "Have you seen him?" Maria nodded grimly. "Once. He came in here a few weeks back. Sat in that booth over there." She gestured to a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. Didn't say much. Just watched. Like he was sizing everyone up. Alex exchanged a glance with Elena. "Did he talk to anyone?" "Not that I saw," Maria said. "But Dagger and a few of his wolves came in not long after. They were all business. No jokes. That's when I knew this guy was dangerous. Even Dagger's scared of him." Sam, who had been silent until now, crossed his arms. "Why hasn't anyone tried to stop this?" Maria let out a bitter laugh. "Stop it? With Kane in their pocket and the wolves running this town? Anyone who tries disappears. Sam, you're lucky they haven't done worse to you for standing up to them." "Noted," Sam muttered. Alex turned back to Maria. "If we wanted to get closer to the mine, what would you suggest?" Maria's eyes narrowed. "I'd suggest you don't. But if you're set on it, the old logging road behind the diner leads up to the ridge overlooking the mine. You'll get a good view from there. But you'll need to be careful. They've got patrols." Alex nodded. "Good to know. Anything else?" Maria hesitated before saying, "Just be ready. The surgeon, he doesn't leave loose ends." The room fell silent. the weight of her words settling over them. Alex's mind was already racing, formulating plans and contingencies. The surgeon was more than a threat, he was a key piece of the puzzle. And Alex intended to find out exactly where he fit. The hum of quiet conversation in Maria's diner was shattered by the unmistakable roar of motorcycles. The sound grew louder, reverberating through the glass windows. And the diners instinctively fell silent. All eyes turned toward the entrance as 3 desert wolves dismounted their bikes and approached the door. Leading them, of course, was Dagger Malone. Maria froze mid-sentence, her eyes darting to Alex, Elena, and Sam. "They're here," she whispered, her voice low but tense. Alex's posture shifted ever so slightly, her movements calm but deliberate. "Stay quiet," she murmured, her gaze sharp as she scanned the room for exits and potential cover. The bell above the door jingled as Dagger and his men entered, their presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone inside. Dagger's gaze swept across the diner, taking in each face with a slow, deliberate calculation. His lips curled into a smirk as he approached the counter, slapping his gloved hand against the surface with a loud thud. "Maria," Dagger drawled, his tone mockingly friendly. "Long time no see. You miss me?" Maria's face remained neutral, but there was a steely edge to her voice as she replied. "What do you want, Dagger?" Dagger leaned forward, his smirk widening. "Oh, nothing much. Just thought I'd stop by for some coffee. Maybe catch up on the latest gossip. You know how it is." Alex's eyes narrowed as she observed him, her instincts screaming that this wasn't a social call. Dagger wasn't one to waste time unless he had a purpose. Her mind worked quickly, calculating the best way to handle the situation without escalating it. One of Dagger's men, a burly enforcer with a jagged scar across his cheek, stepped forward and scanned the room. His eyes lingered a moment too long on Alex before shifting to Maria. "Heard you've been entertaining new faces," he said, his voice dripping with suspicion. "Plenty of new faces passed through," Maria said evenly, not missing a beat. "Most of them just looking for a meal and a place to rest. Nothing to get worked up about." Dagger straightened, his smirk faltering as his expression darkened. "Funny. See, we've been hearing stories about strangers poking their noses where they don't belong. Makes us wonder if maybe you're keeping secrets." "Maria." Sam's hands balled into fists at his sides, but Alex gave him a subtle shake of her head, signaling him to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," Maria replied, her voice steady but firm. "If I've got secrets, they're not ones you'd be interested in." Dagger's chuckle was low and menacing. "Oh, Maria, don't sell yourself short. We're always interested in secrets." Alex's attention shifted to the other patrons, most of whom were frozen in their seats, too scared to intervene. She glanced at Elena, who gave her a barely perceptible nod. The deputy's hand was resting on her holstered firearm, but the tension in her shoulders suggested she knew using it would only make things worse. "Excuse me," Alex said suddenly, her voice cutting through the thick silence. She stood from the booth, drawing Dagger's attention. Dagger turned to her, his eyes narrowing as recognition flickered across his face. "Well, if it isn't the hero from the gas station," he said, his tone laced with mockery. "You sure know how to make an impression." Alex met his gaze without flinching. "And you sure know how to waste time. Are you here for coffee? Or are you just trying to scare everyone?" The room seemed to hold its breath as Dagger stared at her, his smirk twitching at the edges. "You've got a sharp tongue," he said finally. "But don't think for a second that you're untouchable." "I don't need to be untouchable," Alex replied coolly. I just need you to leave." The tension was palpable as the two faced off. But before Dagger could respond, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. Everyone's heads turned instinctively toward the noise. It was enough of a distraction for Alex to act. "Maria." "Back door," Alex said in a low voice, grabbing her jacket from the booth. Elena and Sam were already moving, their footsteps silent as they followed Maria through the kitchen. Dagger turned back just in time to see the group slipping out of sight. He took a step toward the kitchen, but his scarred enforcer stopped him. "Let him go, boss. They'll mess up sooner or later." Dagger's jaw tightened, but he relented, stepping back with a growl. "Fine. Let's go." But this isn't over. The desert wolves left the diner as abruptly as they had entered, the rumble of their motorcycles fading into the distance. Inside, the tension lingered like a storm that had yet to fully pass. Alex, Elena, Sam, and Maria regrouped in the alley behind the diner, their breaths coming quick and shallow. "That was too close," Maria said, her voice shaking slightly. "They're onto us." "Let them be," Alex said, her tone firm. "We'll stay ahead of them, but we need to move fast." Elena nodded, her expression grim. "Agreed. Whatever they're planning, we can't let them get the upper hand." Sam glanced back toward the diner, his face etched with worry. "They'll be back. Let them," Alex said, her voice cold with resolve. "Next time, we'll be ready." Maria led Alex, Elena, and Sam out the back door of her diner into the cool evening air. The glow from the kitchen windows faded as they moved toward the shadows behind the building. Maria stopped at a rusted metal hatch partially concealed by overgrown weeds and loose boards. She crouched and began tugging at the boards, revealing a handle beneath. "This is it," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced over her shoulder, her sharp eyes scanning for anyone who might be watching. "They've been here since Prohibition. Bootleggers used them to move liquor across the state without getting caught. Never thought they'd be used for something worse." Elena stepped forward, her flashlight in hand. "Worse?" she asked, her brow furrowing. Maria nodded grimly. "The cartel found out about these tunnels years ago. Now they use them to move people, drugs, and God knows what else. They've turned a piece of history into something filthy." Alex crouched beside Maria, running her fingers along the rusted edges of the hatch. "How extensive is the network?" she asked. "Miles," Maria said. "They connect to the old copper mine and stretch beyond the town. If you don't know where you're going, you'll get lost. Or worse." Sam's voice was tinged with skepticism. "And you've been down there before?" Maria gave him a sidelong glance. "Enough to know what we're up against. But I don't go deep anymore. Too dangerous. They've got eyes down there, cameras, sensors, guards. It's not just empty tunnels." With a heavy groan, the hatch opened, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that wafted out was cool and damp, carrying the scent of earth and mildew. Elena switched on her flashlight and stepped forward, the beam cutting through the shadows. Alex followed close behind, her movements silent and deliberate. Maria and Sam brought up the rear, Maria pulling the hatch shut behind them. The staircase led to a small chamber where the walls were lined with old, crumbling bricks. The space was tight, forcing them to walk single file. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly, magnified by the enclosed space. "Stick together," Maria warned. "It's easy to get turned around down here." Elena swept her flashlight across the walls, her eyes narrowing as she noticed scuff marks and footprints in the dirt. "Someone's been through here recently," she said, her voice low. Maria nodded. "They're always moving through. Probably transporting another shipment. They've got schedules. But they're unpredictable. We have to be careful." The group moved deeper into the tunnels, the air growing colder with each step. The walls closed in around them, the ceiling low enough that Sam had to duck slightly. Maria pointed out faded markings on the walls, arrows and symbols etched into the brick. Remnants of the bootleggers who had once navigated the same passageways. These markers were how they knew where they were going. Maria explained. The cartel probably uses them too, though they've added their own tech. Alex paused, her sharp eyes catching a faint glint of metal embedded in the wall. She stepped closer and examined it. "Motion sensor," she said, her voice flat. "Basic, but enough to alert them if anyone's down here." Elena frowned. "Can we disable it?" Alex shook her head. "Not without tipping them off. Best we avoid triggering it." Maria led them through a series of twists and turns, the tunnels branching off into smaller passageways that seemed to stretch endlessly. The deeper they went, the more the atmosphere changed. The air grew heavier, tinged with a metallic scent that hinted at the mine's proximity. "We're close," Maria said, her voice hushed. "You'll start to see the changes they've made." As they rounded a corner, the narrow tunnel opened into a larger chamber. The walls here were reinforced with newer bricks, and steel beams supported the ceiling. Bright, artificial light spilled into the space from overhead fixtures, illuminating crates and equipment stacked haphazardly along the edges. Elena's flashlight settled on a set of boot prints leading to one of the crates. She knelt to examine them. "Heavy traffic," she murmured. "They're running a full operation down here." Alex moved to one of the crates and lifted the lid. Inside were neatly packed bundles wrapped in plastic. She pulled one out, the contents unmistakable. "Drugs," she said, her tone grim. "Probably heroin or fentanyl." Maria's expression hardened. "That's just one piece of what they're moving. Keep looking." The group spread out, their movements cautious as they searched the chamber. Sam's hand brushed against a discarded piece of cloth, and he picked it up, his face twisting in disgust. "Looks like someone left in a hurry," he said. "Or was taken," Maria added darkly. Elena's flashlight beam caught a series of papers tacked to the wall. She moved closer and scanned them, her jaw tightening as she realized what they were. "Shipping manifests," she said. "Dates. Locations. But no names. Just numbers." Alex joined her, her sharp eyes scanning the documents. "They're keeping it vague on purpose. These are drop points, likely coordinated with buyers." The distant sound of voices echoed through the tunnel, freezing them in place. Maria held up a hand, signaling for silence. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the faint clink of boots on stone. "We need to move," Alex whispered. She motioned toward a darker corner of the chamber where another tunnel branched off. "This way." The group quickly and quietly retreated into the passage, their movements careful to avoid making noise. As they slipped into the shadows, the voices entered the chamber behind them, their tones low and conversational. The cartel was closer than ever. The narrow passageway Alex led them through gradually widened, revealing a labyrinthine network of tunnels that crisscrossed beneath Shadow Creek. The air was cooler here, laced with a metallic tang that hinted at the mine's proximity. Elena's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating scuffed walls and faint tracks that told stories of recent activity. "These tunnels are more traveled than I expected," Elena muttered, her voice hushed but steady. Maria nodded. pointing to faint markings scratched into the brickwork. That's their way of keeping track. Routes. Directions. Warnings. They've made this place their own. Alex paused, her eyes narrowing at a junction where the tunnel split into 3 directions. She knelt, running her fingers over fresh boot prints in the dirt. They're moving in groups, she said. Looks like a rotation of guards or transport teams. Sam hovered near the rear of the group, his unease evident in the way he kept glancing over his shoulder. You're saying they're patrolling down here? Constantly. Alex replied. And they're well organized. These aren't amateurs. The group pressed on, following the most heavily worn path. The tunnel's atmosphere grew more oppressive as they delved deeper. Scattered along the walls were remnants of human presence, discarded clothing, empty water bottles, even a child's broken toy. Elena picked up the toy, her expression darkening as she turned it over in her hands. They're holding people down here, she said quietly, her voice tinged with anger. Families. Children. Not for long, Alex said, her tone hard and resolute. Let's keep moving. After several more twists and turns, they reached a chamber that had clearly been repurposed. The walls were reinforced with newer materials, and a harsh fluorescent light flickered overhead. Stacked along one side of the room were rows of crates, their lids either sealed or slightly ajar. Elena stepped forward cautiously, her flashlight revealing the contents of one crate. Weapons, she murmured, pulling out a sleek rifle wrapped in protective padding. Military grade. Where are they getting these? Viktor Sokolov, Maria said, her voice heavy with disdain. He's their supplier. Ex-Spetsnaz. Turned cartel security chief. If it's high-tech or deadly, he's behind it. Alex's eyes hardened at the name. Viktor, she repeated. I've crossed paths with his type before. He's dangerous. And he doesn't make mistakes. Which means we can't make any either. Elena said, setting the rifle back carefully. Her flashlight scanned the room, landing on a series of lockers against the far wall. She opened one and pulled out a binder filled with laminated sheets. Manifests, she said, flipping through the pages. Cargo. Schedules. Destinations. It's coded. But it's all here. Take pictures, Alex instructed. We'll decrypt it later. As Elena captured the documents with her phone, Alex moved to a table in the corner covered with maps and schematics. She leaned over, studying the detailed layouts of the tunnel system and the surrounding area. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted a series of red markings encircling specific points on the map. They've got checkpoints and sensors everywhere, Alex said, tracing her finger along the routes. They're not just protecting their operation, they're fortifying it. Viktor's influence is all over this. Maria stepped closer, pointing to a section of the map that led to a larger cavern. That's the cathedral, she said. It's what they call the main hub. If they're holding captives, that's where they'll be. And Viktor? Alex asked. Maria's expression darkened. If he's here, that's where he'll be. The distant sound of footsteps interrupted their discussion. Alex's hand shot up, signaling silence. They extinguished their flashlights and pressed themselves against the walls, blending into the shadows. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by muffled voices speaking in Spanish. The cartel patrol was close. Alex counted at least 3 distinct sets of footsteps. Her mind raced, calculating their options. The patrol wasn't likely to linger, but if they stumbled across the group, there would be no time to retreat. Stay still, Alex whispered, her voice barely audible. The voices drew nearer, one of the men laughing quietly at a comment the others made. They passed by the chamber without entering, their footsteps receding into the distance. The group exhaled collectively, the tension dissipating slightly but not entirely. "We need to keep moving," Alex said. "They'll be back." The next section of the tunnel was narrower, forcing them to move single file. The walls were lined with cables and sensors, a clear sign of Victor's upgrades. Alex motioned for them to stop and examine one of the devices closely. "Thermal sensors," she said, frowning. "They'll pick up body heat if we get too close." "Can we bypass them?" Elena asked. Alex nodded. "If we stay low and keep to the edges, we should be fine. Just move slowly." The group followed Alex's lead, crouching as they navigated the tunnel. The effort was slow and exhausting, but they managed to avoid triggering the sensors. At the end of the passage, they found another chamber, this one smaller but equally fortified. Inside were more crates and a single desk cluttered with documents and electronics. Alex rifled through the papers, her eyes narrowing as she came across a photograph. She froze, staring at the image of Viktor Sokolov standing beside a man she recognized. The memory hit her like a punch to the gut, a mission gone wrong, teammates lost, and a haunting failure that had shaped her ever since. "Alex?" Elena's voice pulled her back to the present. Alex shoved the photograph into her jacket. "Nothing," she said tersely. "Let's keep moving." Elena exchanged a glance with Maria but said nothing. The group exited the chamber and continued deeper into the tunnels, their resolve hardening with every step. The cartel's operation was more extensive and more personal than Alex had anticipated, and she knew they were only scratching the surface of what lay ahead. The tunnel's air grew heavier as Alex, Elena, Maria, and Sam reached a larger cavern, its high ceiling disappearing into shadow. The space was clearly a central hub for the cartel's underground operation. Tables were scattered with maps, papers, and electronic devices, while shelves lined the walls, holding tools and equipment that ranged from ordinary to unsettling. Elena swept her flashlight across the room, illuminating what appeared to be a makeshift command center. "They've built an entire operation down here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex approached one of the tables, her sharp eyes scanning the papers. She picked up a document and frowned. It was a detailed schedule of shipments, coded but with enough information to confirm that the cartel's activities were extensive. Nearby, a map caught her attention. Red circles marked key locations, many of which aligned with known cartel hotspots. "This isn't just local," Alex said, her tone grim. "They're running a network that stretches far beyond Shadow Creek." Maria joined her, pointing to a specific circle on the map. "That's the cathedral," she said. "The mine's main chamber. If they're holding captives, that's where they'll be." Elena rifled through a stack of folders, her expression hardening as she pulled out a set of photographs. The images showed shipping containers, some with their doors slightly ajar, revealing rows of makeshift seats and restraints inside. "They're moving people in these," Elena said, her voice shaking with anger. "This is human trafficking on an industrial scale." Sam stepped back, his face pale. "This is bigger than anything I imagined," he muttered. "How do we stop something like this?" "By taking it apart piece by piece," Alex said, her voice steady. She glanced at the far end of the cavern, where a set of metal doors stood partially ajar. "And it starts with finding out what's behind those doors." The group moved cautiously toward the doors, their footsteps muffled on the dusty floor. Alex motioned for silence as she peered through the gap. Beyond the doors was another chamber, smaller but just as meticulously arranged. Against one wall was a board covered with photographs. Some marked with red XS. Documents pinned beneath them were annotated with precise handwriting. Alex entered first, her gaze immediately drawn to the photographs. Many of the faces were unfamiliar, but one image stopped her cold. It was a group shot, faded and slightly crumpled, showing a team of soldiers in tactical gear. Her breath hitched as she recognized herself among them. "Alex?" Elena's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. Alex didn't answer immediately. She reached out and removed the photograph, her hands steady despite the turmoil brewing inside her. Beneath the picture was a document detailing an operation she knew all too well, a mission that had ended in failure, with lives lost and wounds that never fully healed. "Victor was there," Alex said finally, her voice low but resolute. "He's connected to this. To me." Maria and Elena exchanged a glance but said nothing. The weight of Alex's discovery was evident in her expression, a mixture of anger and determination. "We don't have much time," Alex continued, slipping the photograph and document into her jacket. "They'll be back soon, and we can't afford to get caught here." As if on cue, the faint sound of voices echoed through the tunnels, growing louder with each passing second. Alex's head snapped toward the door. "We need to move now." The group retraced their steps, their movements quick and silent. The distant voices were getting closer, the sharp tone of commands indicating a patrol on high alert. Elena took the lead, guiding them through the labyrinthine tunnels toward an alternate exit Maria had mentioned earlier. "This way," Maria whispered, gesturing toward a narrow passage that sloped upward. "It leads to an old ventilation shaft. They don't use it anymore." They hurried through the passage, the space narrowing until they were forced to move single file. The sound of boots on stone echoed behind them, a reminder that the patrol wasn't far off. Alex brought up the rear, her senses heightened as she kept watch for any signs of pursuit. At the end of the passage, they reached the shaft. Rusted metal rungs led upward into darkness. Maria climbed first, her movements agile despite the cramped space. Elena followed, then Sam. Alex waited, listening intently as the voices grew louder. She climbed quickly, pulling the hatch closed behind her just as the first beam of a flashlight pierced the tunnel below. They emerged into the cool night air, the stars overhead a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness of the tunnels. The group moved quickly away from the hatch, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the cartel's patrol. Maria stopped to catch her breath, leaning against a rock. "That was too close," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But we've got what we need," Alex said, her tone resolute. "Maps, manifests, and proof of their operations. It's a start." Elena nodded, her expression grim. "Now we just have to figure out how to use it without getting ourselves killed." Alex's gaze hardened as she looked back toward the horizon. "We will. And when we do, we'll make sure they never operate here again." The group fell silent, the weight of their discovery pressing heavily on them. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, they had the advantage, and Alex had a personal score to settle. The safe house, a modest cabin hidden deep within the woods outside Shadow Creek, was dimly lit, the air filled with tension as Alex spread a map of the town and its surrounding tunnels across the dining table. Elena, Maria, and Sam gathered around her, their faces reflecting a mix of determination and unease. A single kerosene lamp flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. Maria broke the silence, her voice steady but tinged with worry. "If we're doing this, we need all the help we can get. The cartel isn't going to sit back and let us take them down. Alex nodded. Agreed. And that's where your nephew comes in. Maria's eyes darkened slightly. But she didn't protest. Instead, she turned toward the door as it creaked open, revealing Carlos Delgado. The young man, barely in his 20s, had a wiry frame and an air of nervous energy. His jeans and work boots were caked with dust from the mine, and his eyes darted around the room as he stepped inside. Carlos, Maria said gently, gesturing for him to join them. This is Alex and Elena. They're here to help. Carlos nodded cautiously, his gaze settling on Alex. I've heard about you. The wolves aren't happy. Word's spreading fast about what you've done. Alex's expression didn't waver. Good. That means they're nervous. And that gives us an advantage. She pointed to the map. Maria said you've been working at the mine. What can you tell us about their operation? Carlos hesitated, glancing at his aunt. Maria gave him an encouraging nod. Go ahead. Me, Joe. They need to know. Taking a deep breath, Carlos stepped closer to the table. They've got patrols around the clock. Most of the guards are armed. But some of them aren't professionals. They're just thugs from the wolves. The real danger is in the cathedral. The main chamber, Alex said, recalling the maps they'd found in the tunnels. Yeah, Carlos confirmed. That's where they keep most of their shipments. Drugs, weapons, and people. They've got holding cells down there. I've seen them bring in captives. Mostly women and kids. It's bad. Elena's jaw tightened. How many guards are stationed there? At least a dozen. Maybe more. Carlos replied. And they rotate every few hours. The shifts aren't consistent, so it's hard to predict when they'll change. Alex leaned over the map, marking key points as Carlos spoke. We'll need to hit them fast and hard. Cut off their reinforcements before they can react. Maria spoke up. And what about Victor? If he's there, he'll be ready for a fight. Then we make sure we're ready too. Alex said. She straightened, her expression firm. I have someone who can help with that. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. After a few moments, a familiar voice answered. Alex. I was wondering when you'd call. Mason. Alex said, a rare note of relief in her voice. I've got a situation here that needs Ghost Team's expertise. Can you help? Always. Mason Hayes replied. Send me the details. And we'll mobilize. What are we dealing with? Cartel operation. Alex said. Human trafficking. Weapons. Drugs. It's centered in an old copper mine near Shadow Creek. They've got patrols, sensors, and heavily armed guards. Sounds like a party, Mason said, his tone light but laced with resolve. We'll bring the fireworks. ETA? 48 hours. Alex said. We'll need gear, recon, and support for a coordinated strike. Consider it done. Mason replied. I'll see you soon. As the call ended, Alex turned back to the group. Ghost Team is on board. That gives us the manpower and firepower we need. Carlos, we'll need you to map out the mine's layout and pinpoint any weak spots. Elena, can you rally a few deputies you trust? Elena nodded. I have a couple of people who'll help. They're not tied to Kane. And they hate what's happening in this town as much as I do. Good. Alex said. Maria, you'll coordinate from here. Keep an eye on the town and make sure no one's onto us. Maria's expression was resolute. I'll do whatever it takes. Carlos's eyes darted between them. And me? What if they recognize me? You'll be our inside man, Alex said. But only if you're sure. This is dangerous. Carlos. You don't have to do it. Carlos swallowed hard. But he nodded. I'll do it. I've seen what they're doing to people. If I can help stop it, I will. Alex placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You're brave. We'll make sure you're not alone. The group continued to strategize late into the night, their plans becoming more detailed with each passing hour. When they finally dispersed to rest, the weight of what lay ahead was clear. The clock was ticking, and the stakes had never been higher. The day before the operation was a whirlwind of preparation. The safe house transformed into a makeshift command center. Its once modest interior now cluttered with maps, tactical gear, and weapons. Alex took charge of organizing the group. Her voice calm but commanding as she assigned roles and outlined the plan in greater detail. We'll hit the mine in 2 phases, Alex explained, pointing to the map spread across the table. Phase 1, disable their surveillance and cut off communications. Phase 2, breach the cathedral and extract the captives. Ghost Team will handle most of the heavy lifting, but we'll need everyone to play their part. Mason Hayes, now physically present with his team, stood next to Alex. His presence added a layer of confidence to the group. Dressed in tactical gear, he exuded professionalism and an easy charisma that contrasted with Alex's steely demeanor. We'll take the north entrance, Mason said, gesturing to a point on the map. That's where their main power supply is located. If we knock it out, they'll be running blind. Elena chimed in. And the guards? They'll respond fast if they think something's wrong. That's where Phase 1 comes in, Alex replied. Carlos will create a distraction near the south entrance. It'll pull some of their manpower away and give us the opening we need. Carlos, seated at the edge of the table, looked up nervously but nodded. I've memorized their patrol schedules. I'll be careful. Maria placed a hand on his shoulder. Just stick to the plan. Me, Joe. You'll do fine. The afternoon was spent drilling and preparing. Mason and Ghost Team worked with Alex to train Elena and Sam in basic combat techniques. In the clearing behind the cabin, they practiced clearing rooms, handling weapons, and communicating under pressure. Alex's sharp eyes missed nothing, and she corrected mistakes with a firm but patient tone. Sam, keep your stance wider, Alex instructed as he raised his shotgun. You need stability if you're going to hit your target. Sam adjusted, his expression determined. Got it. Let's go again. Elena, meanwhile, was practicing with a pistol under Mason's guidance. Despite her experience as a deputy, the stakes of this mission demanded a new level of precision and confidence. Mason's easygoing manner helped steady her nerves. You're a natural, Mason said as Elena hit the center of a makeshift target. Just remember to control your breathing. Slow and steady. Maria watched from the sidelines, her face a mix of pride and worry. She'd spent the morning organizing supplies and coordinating with locals she trusted to keep an eye on the town while they were gone. Now, she stood with Carlos, her hand resting on his arm as they observed the training. You don't have to do this, Maria said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Carlos turned to her, his expression resolute. I do. If we don't stop them now, it'll only get worse. You've done so much for this town. Tia, let me do this for you. Maria pulled him into a tight hug, her eyes glistening. Just promise me you'll come back. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the group gathered inside the cabin for their final strategy meeting. The air was thick with anticipation. Every detail of the plan meticulously reviewed. Ghost Team will breach the north entrance and secure the power supply, Alex said, her finger tracing the route on the map. Elena, you and I will take the west tunnel and disable their communication center. Maria, you'll monitor from here and coordinate with Carlos. What about the captives? Sam asked. Once the guards are distracted and the power's down, we'll move into the cathedral, Alex replied. That's where Ghost Team will focus their efforts. Our priority is to get those people out safely. Mason leaned against the wall, arms crossed. One more thing, he said. We've confirmed that Viktor Sokolov is on site. He's not going to go down without a fight. Alex's expression hardened. Then we make sure he doesn't have the chance to fight back. The room fell silent, the gravity of the mission settling over them. Each person carried their own fears, but none voiced them. They'd come too far to turn back now. We leave at first light, Alex said finally. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we bring this operation down. Later that night, Alex stepped outside. The cool air a welcome reprieve from the cabin's tense atmosphere. Mason joined her, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. You ready for this? He asked. Alex didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the dark horizon. I have to be. Mason studied her for a moment. This isn't just about the mission, is it? It's personal. Alex sighed, her shoulders stiffening. Viktor's connected to something I thought I'd left behind. Taking him down, it's more than just justice. It's closure. Mason nodded. Then let's make sure we get it right. Alex finally turned to him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. We will. Thanks for being here, Mason. Always, he said simply. The two stood in silence for a moment longer, the weight of the coming battle heavy but shared. Tomorrow, they would face the cartel. Tonight, they prepared for war. The mine's perimeter was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the distant glow of the cartel's floodlights marking their stronghold. Alex crouched behind a boulder at the northern ridge, scanning the terrain through her night vision goggles. Beside her, Mason Hayes gestured silently to Ghost Team, who were spread out in strategic positions, their rifles trained on the entrance below. We're in position, Mason murmured into his comms, his voice barely audible. Copy that, Alex replied, her gaze locked on the scene ahead. Elena, how's it looking on your end? Elena's voice crackled through the earpiece. Surveillance is still active. Carlos and I are moving to disable the primary feed now. Stand by. Alex glanced at Mason. We need their eyes down before we make a move. Let's give them a minute. Mason nodded, signaling his team to hold. The night was eerily silent, broken only by the occasional murmur of the cartel guards' voices echoing up from the mine's entrance. Alex's fingers tightened on her rifle as the minutes stretched, the weight of anticipation pressing heavily on her chest. North perimeter clear, one of Ghost Team's snipers reported softly. No movement near the power station. Good, Alex said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Elena. Status? Almost there, Elena replied, her breathing controlled but tense. Carlos is patching into their system now. Give us another 30 seconds. Alex's gaze flicked to Mason, who gave her a reassuring nod. We've got this, he said quietly. The comms crackled again. Surveillance is down, Elena confirmed. You're clear to move. Alex exhaled sharply. Ghost Team. Execute Phase 1. Neutralize the power station and secure the north entrance. Mason signaled his team, and they moved like shadows, their forms blending seamlessly with the terrain. Alex followed closely, her rifle at the ready as they descended toward the mine. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the stillness of the night. The power station was a modest structure nestled against the side of the mine's main building. 2 guards stood outside, their postures relaxed, unaware of the danger closing in. Mason held up a hand, signaling for Ghost Team to split into flanking positions. 2 targets, Mason whispered. Take them quietly. 2 Ghost Team operators moved in unison, their footsteps silent. In seconds, the guards were subdued, their bodies lowered gently to the ground. Mason motioned for Alex to follow as the team breached the power station, their movements precise and methodical. Inside, the hum of machinery filled the small room. One of the operators quickly located the main control panel and began rigging explosives. Alex stood guard at the entrance, her eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of reinforcements. Charges set, the operator reported. We're ready to blow. Do it, Alex said, her voice firm. The team retreated to a safe distance as the explosives detonated with a muffled thud. The mine's floodlights flickered and died, plunging the area into darkness. Shouts echoed from the guards stationed at the entrance, their confusion evident. Phase 1 complete, Mason reported, moving to secure the entrance. Meanwhile, Elena and Carlos were navigating the labyrinthine tunnels leading to the mine's south entrance. The dim glow of their flashlights illuminated the rough walls, the air heavy with the scent of earth and dampness. How much farther? Carlos whispered, his voice tinged with nerves. Elena checked the map on her tablet. Not far. Stay close. The sound of footsteps ahead froze them in place. Elena extinguished her flashlight, pressing Carlos against the wall as 2 cartel guards passed by, their conversation low and hurried. Once the guards were out of earshot, Elena motioned for Carlos to continue. They reached a junction where a small security station was set up. A single guard sat at a desk, his attention focused on a flickering monitor. Elena signaled for Carlos to stay back as she crept forward, her pistol drawn. With practiced precision, she subdued the guard, securing the area. We're clear, Elena said, gesturing for Carlos to join her. Together, they disabled the remaining surveillance equipment and set up the diversion. Carlos lit a series of flares, tossing them into the nearby tunnels to create the illusion of movement. That should keep them busy, Carlos said, his voice steadier now. Let's move, Elena replied. Alex and Ghost Team are counting on us. Back at the north entrance, chaos had erupted. Cartel guards scrambled to respond to the sudden loss of power, their flashlights bobbing erratically in the darkness. Ghost Team moved swiftly, their silenced weapons dispatching enemies with lethal efficiency. Alex and Mason led the charge, their movements synchronized as they cleared the way toward the cathedral. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the tunnels, a stark reminder of the stakes. North entrance secure, Mason reported. We're moving into the main tunnel. Copy that, Alex replied. Stay sharp. The surgeon's men won't go down without a fight. As they advanced, Alex's mind raced, her focus razor sharp. This was the moment they'd been building toward, and there was no room for error. The fate of the captives, the town, and perhaps even their lives rested on the success of this mission. The group reached the final stretch leading to the cathedral, the tunnel's walls lined with crude graffiti and discarded belongings. Alex signaled for a halt, her ears straining to catch the faint sound of voices ahead. She turned to Mason, her expression grim. They're waiting for us, she said. We need to hit them hard and fast. Mason nodded. Ghost team is ready. Just give the word. Alex took a deep breath, her grip tightening on her rifle. Let's finish this. The cavernous cathedral loomed ahead, its entrance flanked by 2 armed guards standing tense, their flashlights cutting through the heavy darkness. Alex motioned for Ghost team to spread out and take position. She crouched behind a jagged outcrop of rock, the cold bite of the stone grounding her. Mason's voice came softly through the comms. 2 guards. Visible. Likely more inside. What's the play? Alex's eyes scanned the area, her mind calculating. We take them silently. No alarms. Ghost team covers us from here while Elena and I breach. Mason, hold the rear in case they try to flank. A faint crackle over the comms confirmed Mason's acknowledgement. Ghost team's snipers aligned their sights. And within seconds, the 2 guards crumpled to the ground, their bodies silent against the dust-laden floor. Move in, Alex commanded. The cathedral's interior was far more imposing than Alex had anticipated. The massive chamber's walls were carved roughly from the earth, jagged and uneven, with industrial lighting casting eerie shadows. Large crates line one side, while on the other, makeshift holding cells constructed of chain-link fences confined the captives. The faint sound of muffled sobbing and whispers cut through the still air. Elena's grip tightened on her weapon as her flashlight illuminated the faces of the captives. Women and children huddled together, their expressions a mix of fear and despair. She swallowed hard, her voice low. Alex. They're here. We found them. Alex stepped forward, her tone sharp and commanding. Elena. Secure the captives. Get Carlos and Maria on comms. Tell them we need extraction ready. Mason. Cover our flanks. Elena nodded, moving swiftly toward the cells. She spoke in a calming tone, trying to ease the captives' fears as she unlocked the gates. Meanwhile, Carlos's voice crackled over the radio. Extraction point is ready, he said. We'll guide them through the south tunnels. Just get them to us. As Elena guided the first group toward the exit, a shout rang out from deeper within the chamber. They're here. Intruders. The sound of boots on stone and the unmistakable click of weapons being readied echoed through the space. Alex's adrenaline surged as she shouted. Positions. They're coming. The firefight erupted in an instant. Cartel guards poured into the cathedral from multiple entrances, their weapons blazing. Ghost team responded with lethal precision, their suppressors muting the chaos as they took down targets one by one. Mason's voice was calm but firm over the comms as he directed his team. Focus fire on the left flank. Alex. They're pushing hard from the east. Alex swung her rifle around, her sights locking onto a trio of guards advancing on Elena's position. She fired in controlled bursts, dropping them before they could reach the captives. Elena. Status? Alex called out. First group is clear. Elena replied, her voice strained. Working on the second. They're scared. Alex. It's slowing us down. Do what you can. Alex said. We'll hold them off. The firefight intensified, the sharp crack of gunfire reverberating through the cavern. Dust and debris filled the air as stray bullets struck the walls and crates. Alex moved with practiced precision, her movements a seamless blend of offense and defense as she pushed back the advancing guards. As the tide of the battle began to shift in their favor, a sudden, chilling voice echoed through the cathedral. Alex Morgan. Alex froze, her grip on her rifle tightening. She turned slowly, her eyes locking onto Viktor Sokolov as he stepped into the chamber. The cartel's security chief was flanked by heavily armed guards, his cold gaze fixed on Alex. You should have stayed away, Victor said, his voice calm but menacing. You've made a grave mistake. Alex's jaw tightened as she stepped forward, her weapon trained on Victor. The only mistake was letting you get this far. It ends tonight. Victor's lips curled into a faint smirk. You think you can stop this? You're out of your depth. Morgan. Always have been. The tension in the room was palpable as the two faced off. Around them, the battle raged on. But for Alex, the world narrowed to Victor and the unfinished business between them. This is for them, Alex said, her voice low but filled with resolve. For every life you destroyed. Victor's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. Then come and get me. The fight between Alex and Victor was brutal and unrelenting. Victor moved with the precision of a trained soldier, his strikes calculated and powerful. Alex matched him blow for blow, her years of experience and determination driving her forward. Around them, Ghost Team and the remaining cartel guards continued to clash, the chaos of the battle serving as a backdrop to their personal war. Victor lunged at Alex, his knife slicing through the air. She dodged narrowly, countering with a swift kick that sent him staggering back. Blood trickled from a cut on her cheek, but she didn't falter. You can't win this, Victor taunted, his voice strained. You don't have what it takes. Watch me, Alex snapped, her voice filled with defiance. With a final, decisive move, Alex disarmed Victor, sending his knife skittering across the floor. She pinned him to the ground, her weapon trained on his chest. It's over, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Victor glared up at her, his expression a mix of anger and defeat. You think this changes anything? The surgeon will finish what I started. Alex's eyes narrowed. But before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps and voices filled the chamber. The reinforcements had arrived. Mason. We've got company, Alex shouted into her comms. Mason's voice came back immediately. Hold your position. We're on it. Alex pulled Victor to his feet, securing his hands behind his back with a zip tie. You're coming with us, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. As the captives were evacuated through the south tunnels, Alex and Ghost Team braced for the next wave. The surgeon's arrival would be the ultimate test of their resolve. And Alex knew the night was far from over. The cavernous cathedral loomed ahead, its entrance flanked by 2 armed guards standing tense, their flashlights cutting through the heavy darkness. Alex motioned for Ghost Team to spread out and take position. She crouched behind a jagged outcrop of rock, the cold bite of the stone grounding her. Mason's voice came softly through the comms. 2 guards. Visible. Likely more inside. What's the play? Alex's eyes scanned the area, her mind calculating. We take them silently. No alarms. Ghost Team covers us from here while Elena and I breach. Mason. Hold the rear in case they try to flank. A faint crackle over the comms confirmed Mason's acknowledgement. Ghost Team's snipers aligned their sights. And within seconds, the 2 guards crumpled to the ground, their bodies silent against the dust-laden floor. Move in, Alex commanded. The cathedral's interior was far more imposing than Alex had anticipated. The massive chamber's walls were carved roughly from the earth, jagged and uneven, with industrial lighting casting eerie shadows. Large crates lined one side, while on the other, makeshift holding cells constructed of chain-link fences confined the captives. The faint sound of muffled sobbing and whispers cut through the still air. Elena's grip tightened on her weapon as her flashlight illuminated the faces of the captives. Women and children huddled together, their expressions a mix of fear and despair. She swallowed hard, her voice low. "Alex. They're here. We found them." Alex stepped forward, her tone sharp and commanding. "Elena. Secure the captives. Get Carlos and Maria on comms. Tell them we need extraction ready. Mason. Cover our flanks." Elena nodded, moving swiftly toward the cells. She spoke in a calming tone, trying to ease the captives' fears as she unlocked the gates. Meanwhile, Carlos's voice crackled over the radio. "Extraction point is ready," he said. "We'll guide them through the south tunnels. Just get them to us." As Elena guided the first group toward the exit, a shout rang out from deeper within the chamber. "They're here! Intruders!" The sound of boots on stone and the unmistakable click of weapons being readied echoed through the space. Alex's adrenaline surged as she shouted, "Positions! They're coming!" The firefight erupted in an instant. Cartel guards poured into the cathedral from multiple entrances, their weapons blazing. Ghost Team responded with lethal precision, their suppressors muting the chaos as they took down targets one by one. Mason's voice was calm but firm over the comms as he directed his team. "Focus fire on the left flank. Alex. They're pushing hard from the east." Alex swung her rifle around, her sights locking onto a trio of guards advancing on Elena's position. She fired in controlled bursts, dropping them before they could reach the captives. "Elena. Status?" Alex called out. "First group is clear." Elena replied, her voice strained. "Working on the second. They're scared. Alex. It's slowing us down. Do what you can." Alex said. "We'll hold them off." The firefight intensified, the sharp crack of gunfire reverberating through the cavern. Dust and debris filled the air as stray bullets struck the walls and crates. Alex moved with practiced precision, her movements a seamless blend of offense and defense as she pushed back the advancing guards. As the tide of the battle began to shift in their favor, a sudden, chilling voice echoed through the cathedral. "Alex Morgan." Alex froze, her grip on her rifle tightening. She turned slowly, her eyes locking onto Viktor Sokolov as he stepped into the chamber. The cartel's security chief was flanked by heavily armed guards, his cold gaze fixed on Alex. "You should have stayed away," Viktor said, his voice calm but menacing. "You've made a grave mistake." Alex's jaw tightened as she stepped forward, her weapon trained on Viktor. "The only mistake was letting you get this far. It ends tonight." Viktor's lips curled into a faint smirk. "You think you can stop this? You're out of your depth. Morgan. Always have been." The tension in the room was palpable as the two faced off. Around them, the battle raged on. But for Alex, the world narrowed to Viktor and the unfinished business between them. "This is for them," Alex said, her voice low but filled with resolve. "For every life you destroyed." Viktor's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "Then come and get me." The fight between Alex and Viktor was brutal and unrelenting. Viktor moved with the precision of a trained soldier, his strikes calculated and powerful. Alex matched him blow for blow, her years of experience and determination driving her forward. Around them, Ghost Team and the remaining cartel guards continued to clash, the chaos of the battle serving as a backdrop to their personal war. Viktor lunged at Alex, his knife slicing through the air. She dodged narrowly, countering with a swift kick that sent him staggering back. Blood trickled from a cut on her cheek, but she didn't falter. "You can't win this," Viktor taunted, his voice strained. "You don't have what it takes. Watch me." Alex snapped, her voice filled with defiance. With a final, decisive move, Alex disarmed Victor, sending his knife skittering across the floor. She pinned him to the ground, her weapon trained on his chest. "It's over," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Victor glared up at her, his expression a mix of anger and defeat. "You think this changes anything? The surgeon will finish what I started." Alex's eyes narrowed. But before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps and voices filled the chamber. The reinforcements had arrived. "Mason, we've got company," Alex shouted into her comms. Mason's voice came back immediately. "Hold your position. We're on it." Alex pulled Victor to his feet, securing his hands behind his back with a zip tie. "You're coming with us," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. As the captives were evacuated through the south tunnels, Alex and Ghost Team braced for the next wave. The surgeon's arrival would be the ultimate test of their resolve. And Alex knew the night was far from over. The night air outside the cathedral was heavy with tension. Alex leaned against the jagged rock wall, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. Around her, the team regrouped, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt. The firefight had left its mark on the landscape, their bodies, and their minds. "We need to go back in," Alex said, her voice resolute despite the exhaustion that tugged at her. "The surgeon's still in there. This isn't over." Mason Hayes crouched beside her, his rifle slung across his chest. "You sure about this?" He's fortified his position. "We'll be walking into a trap." Alex's eyes burned with determination. "I'm sure. This ends tonight." Elena Cruz stepped forward, her face set in a grim mask of resolve. "If we don't stop him now, he'll rebuild. Everything we've done will mean nothing." "She's right," Mason said, his voice steady. He glanced at the rest of the team. "Let's get ready. We go back in 10. The safe house served as their staging ground. Maps and equipment littered the room, the dim glow of a single lantern casting flickering shadows on the walls. Alex stood at the center, her finger tracing the tunnel layout on a worn blueprint. "He's in the lower chamber," she said, pointing to a marked area near the cathedral's core. "It's heavily defended, but there are access points here and here." Carlos Delgado leaned over the map, his brow furrowed. "Those tunnels are tight. If they've set traps, we'll be sitting ducks. That's why we're going to split into 2 teams." Alex replied. "Ghost Team will take the east tunnel and create a diversion. Mason and I will lead the main assault through the west entrance." "And me?" Carlos asked. Maria stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You'll stay here. You've done enough." "Me, Joe." Carlos started to protest, but Alex cut him off. "Maria's right. We need someone to monitor comms and guide us if things go south. That's your job now." Reluctantly, Carlos nodded. "Okay. Just promise me you'll bring everyone back." Alex didn't answer, but the look in her eyes was enough. As the team prepared for the mission, Alex found herself alone for a moment, leaning against the wall with her head bowed. Memories from Guatemala surfaced unbidden, the faces of her lost teammates flashing before her eyes. Their voices echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of the mission that had gone so terribly wrong. "You can't save everyone," one of them had said, his voice heavy with regret. "Sometimes, you just survive." But surviving hadn't been enough. Not then. And not now. Alex clenched her fists, forcing the memories back into the recesses of her mind. This wasn't about the past. It was about finishing what she'd started and ensuring no one else suffered the way she had. Mason's voice broke through her thoughts. "You good?" Alex looked up, her expression hardening. "I'm ready." Mason nodded, his gaze steady. "Then let's finish this." The descent back into the cathedral's tunnels was eerily silent. The air was thick with tension, every step echoing faintly in the confined space. Ghost Team moved ahead, their presence barely noticeable as they slipped into the east tunnel. Alex, Mason, and Elena took the west, their weapons at the ready. "Keep it quiet," Alex whispered. "We don't know how many are left." The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to move single file. The faint smell of smoke and gunpowder lingered in the air, a reminder of the earlier battle. Alex's senses were on high alert, every sound and shadow scrutinized as they pressed forward. They reached a junction where the tunnel split in two. Alex held up a hand, signaling for the team to stop. She crouched, examining the ground for any signs of movement. Scuff marks and boot prints told her everything she needed to know. "They're close," she said softly. "Stay sharp." Mason nodded, his rifle raised as he took point. Elena followed closely, her pistol steady despite the tension in her movements. Alex brought up the rear, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a faint click, barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. Alex froze, her heart racing as she realized what it was. "Tripwire," she hissed, grabbing Mason's arm and pulling him back. The wire was almost invisible, stretched across the tunnel at ankle height. Attached to it was a crude but effective explosive device, its blinking red light a stark warning. "Can you disarm it?" Mason asked. Alex nodded, crouching down to examine the device. Her hands moved with practiced precision, her breathing steady as she worked. Time seemed to stretch as she carefully cut the wires, her focus unyielding. The blinking light faded, and Alex exhaled sharply. "It's clear. Let's move." The team pressed on, the tension ratcheting higher with every step. The tunnel eventually opened into a larger chamber, its walls lined with crates and equipment. Alex signaled for the team to spread out, their movements slow and deliberate. A faint noise drew her attention to the far corner of the room. She raised her weapon, her finger hovering over the trigger as she advanced. The noise grew louder, resolving into the sound of a voice, low and urgent. Alex rounded the corner and found a lone cartel soldier speaking into a radio. His eyes widened in alarm as he spotted her. But before he could react, Alex fired. The shot was clean and precise, dropping him instantly. "They know we're here," Alex said, her voice tight. "We need to move fast." The team regrouped and pushed forward, their pace quickening. The final confrontation was close, and Alex's resolve burned brighter with every step. This time, there would be no escape for the surgeon. The tunnel widened into another chamber, the flickering light from hanging bulbs casting ominous shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Alex raised her hand, signaling the team to stop. The faint hum of machinery and muffled voices carried through the air. This was it. They were nearing the surgeon's fortified position. "Stay close," Alex whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're expecting us." Mason adjusted his grip on his rifle, his gaze scanning the room. "Ghost Team is in position," he murmured into the comms. "We'll engage on your signal." "Copy that," Alex replied. She turned to Elena, who was crouched beside her. "Ready?" Elena nodded, her jaw set in determination. "Let's finish this." The team advanced, their movements silent and deliberate. As they approached the far end of the chamber, The voices grew louder, more distinct. Alex's heartbeat quickened, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on her. She signaled Mason to split off, leading Ghost Team to secure the flanks while she and Elena pressed forward. They reached a doorway partially obscured by stacks of crates. Alex peered around the edge, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. The surgeon stood at the center of the room, his tall, lean figure commanding attention. Around him, a dozen guards moved with purpose, their weapons at the ready. The air was thick with tension, the atmosphere charged with the impending confrontation. Alex ducked back, her mind racing. 12 guards, she whispered. He's dug in. Elena's eyes narrowed. We've handled worse. Alex allowed herself a faint smile. Let's make it count. The assault began with a coordinated strike. Ghost Team launched their attack from the flanks, their suppressed weapons dispatching guards with surgical precision. The sudden chaos threw the cartel into disarray, their shouts of alarm echoing through the chamber. Alex and Elena moved in tandem, their movements fluid and precise. Alex's rifle found its mark with every shot, her training and instincts guiding her through the chaos. Elena covered her, her pistol barking sharply as she took down guards attempting to regroup. The cartel's response was fierce. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, sending sparks and debris flying. Mason's voice crackled over the comms. We've got the left flank secure. Keep pushing forward. Copy that. Alex replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her. The room was a blur of movement and noise. Guards shouted orders, their voices drowned out by the staccato bursts of gunfire. Alex pressed forward, her focus unyielding as she advanced toward the surgeon's position. As they neared the center of the room, the surgeon's voice cut through the chaos. Hold the line, he commanded, his tone cold and authoritative. His guards rallied, their defense becoming more coordinated as they formed a protective barrier around him. Alex's jaw tightened. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She signaled to Elena to flank right while she moved to the left. Her eyes locked on the surgeon. The flashbacks hit her like a wave. The jungle of Guatemala, the sound of gunfire, the cries of her teammates as the mission spiraled out of control. She pushed the memories aside, her grip tightening on her rifle. This wasn't then. This was now. And she wouldn't fail. Elena's voice broke through the comms. I'm in position. Ready on your mark. Mark, Alex said, her voice firm. Elena fired, her shots precise and deadly. The guards nearest to the surgeon fell, their defenses crumbling under the relentless assault. Alex seized the opening, charging forward with unwavering determination. The surgeon turned to face her, his expression calm but calculating. Alex Morgan, he said, his voice carrying an edge of mockery. You're persistent. I'll give you that. Alex didn't respond. She raised her rifle, her sights trained on him. It's over. He smirked, his hand moving to the pistol at his side. Oh. I don't think so. The confrontation escalated into a brutal close-quarters battle. The surgeon was fast, his movements precise and practiced. He dodged Alex's strikes, countering with calculated efficiency. Around them, the battle raged on, the sound of gunfire and shouting creating a chaotic symphony. Alex blocked his next strike, countering with a swift kick that sent him staggering back. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. But she didn't falter. Her determination burned brighter with every moment. You can't win this, the surgeon taunted, his voice steady despite his labored breathing. You think taking me down will change anything? I don't care, Alex replied, her voice sharp. You're done. With a final, decisive move, Alex disarmed him, her knife slicing through the strap of his holster. She pinned him against the wall, her rifle pressed to his chest. "It's over," she said, her voice unwavering. The surgeon stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps. But you'll never outrun your past." Alex's jaw tightened. But she didn't rise to the bait. She secured his hands behind his back, her focus already shifting to the next phase. "Mason, the surgeon is in custody," she said over the comms. "Begin extraction." "Roger that," Mason replied. "We'll meet you at the rendezvous point." As they moved to regroup with the rest of the team, Alex couldn't shake the weight of the surgeon's words. The mission was a victory, but the echoes of the past lingered. She glanced at Elena, who gave her a reassuring nod. "You did it," Elena said. "It's over." Alex forced a small smile. "Not yet. But we're getting there." The team emerged from the tunnels into the cool night air, the stars above a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind. For the first time in a long time, Alex felt a flicker of hope. The fight wasn't over, but they had won this battle. And for now, that was enough. The chill of the night seeped into Alex's bones as she and Mason escorted the surgeon through the dense tunnels. His hands were bound, and his steps were slow, but his calm demeanor was unsettling. Around them, the sounds of gunfire and chaos from the cathedral began to fade, leaving only the heavy echoes of their footsteps. The surgeon's voice broke the silence. "Tell me, Morgan," he said, his tone mocking. "Do you really believe you've won?" Alex didn't answer, her gaze fixed ahead. She gripped her weapon tightly, resisting the urge to let his words get under her skin. Mason glanced at her but said nothing, his focus on ensuring their path was clear. "This operation," the surgeon continued, his voice dripping with derision, "it's just a piece of the puzzle. Cut off one head, and another grows in its place. You're fighting a war you can't win." Alex halted abruptly, spinning to face him. Her eyes burned with fury as she stepped closer, the barrel of her rifle just inches from his chest. "Shut up," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You're done talking." For a moment, the surgeon's calm facade cracked, but he recovered quickly, smirking as he took a step back. "Touch a nerve." "Did I?" Mason placed a steady hand on Alex's shoulder. "Not worth it," he said quietly. "Let's keep moving." Alex took a deep breath, lowering her weapon. Without another word, she turned and continued down the tunnel, her jaw clenched tightly. The final stretch to the extraction point was eerily quiet. The weight of the mission and its cost hung heavily over the group. As they neared the exit, the faint glow of headlights illuminated the end of the tunnel, a small convoy of vehicles waiting to take them to safety. Maria and Carlos stood near one of the SUVs, their faces a mixture of relief and apprehension. Carlos's eyes widened as he saw the surgeon being led out, his bound hands a clear sign of victory. "You got him," Carlos said, his voice filled with awe. Maria's gaze shifted to Alex, her expression unreadable. "It's over?" Alex shook her head. "Not yet. But we've dealt a serious blow. We'll need to debrief and get the captives to safety." As they loaded the surgeon into one of the armored vehicles, Alex caught Maria's arm, pulling her aside. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "For everything. We couldn't have done this without you." Maria nodded, her eyes glistening. "Just make sure he pays for what he's done." The drive back to the safe zone was somber. Mason and Alex rode in silence, the surgeon seated between two ghost team operatives in the vehicle ahead. The weight of the night's events pressed heavily on Alex. Her mind replaying the confrontation in the cathedral and the memories it had dredged up. Mason's voice broke the silence. "You okay?" Alex hesitated before answering. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's a lot." Mason nodded, his gaze steady. "You did what you had to do. This is a win." "Alex, don't forget that." She offered a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know. It's just Guatemala. It feels like it's still there, just under the surface." "You faced it tonight," Mason said. "And you won. That's what matters." Alex didn't respond. Her gaze fixed on the dark horizon as the convoy sped through the night. Back at the safe zone, the team regrouped, their exhaustion evident but tempered by the knowledge of their success. The captives had been transported to a secure location, and the surgeon was in custody, awaiting transfer to federal authorities. Alex stood apart from the others, her arms crossed as she watched the activity around her. Elena approached, her expression one of concern. "You should get some rest," Elena said. "You've earned it." Alex shook her head. "Not yet. There's still work to do." "There's always work to do," Elena replied. "But you can't keep running on fumes. Take a breath." "Alex, you've done more than enough." For the first time that night, Alex allowed herself to exhale deeply. She nodded slowly, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "Thanks, Elena." As dawn broke, Alex found herself standing on a ridge overlooking the safe zone. The first rays of sunlight painted the landscape in hues of gold and pink, a stark contrast to the darkness that had defined the night. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the photograph she had taken from the cathedral. It was worn and faded, the faces of her teammates from Guatemala staring back at her. Alex ran her thumb over the image, her mind a swirl of memories and emotions. "This is for you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I couldn't save you then, but I'll make sure it wasn't for nothing." Mason approached, his presence quiet but steady. "Beautiful morning," he said, his tone light. Alex glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Yeah, it is." He gestured toward the photo in her hand. "Old friends?" Alex nodded. "Old ghosts. But maybe it's time to let them rest." Mason's expression softened. "You've earned that, Alex. We all have." For the first time in a long time, Alex felt a sense of peace. The fight wasn't over. But for now, she allowed herself to savor the victory. The sun rose higher, casting its light over the safe zone, a symbol of hope in the aftermath of darkness. The morning sun cast a soft golden glow over the quiet hills surrounding Shadow Creek, a stark contrast to the chaos that had gripped the town only days before. Alex stood near the convoy of medical vehicles stationed on the outskirts, watching as the freed captives were carefully loaded into vans. Each face told a story of resilience and pain, and every step toward safety felt like a small victory. Maria stood nearby, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression both proud and solemn. She exchanged a glance with Alex, then nodded toward the captives. "They're going to be okay. Thanks to you." Alex shook her head slightly. "Not just me. It was all of us. You, Carlos, Mason, Ghost Team, everyone played their part." Maria's lips curved into a faint smile. "You're too modest. Without you, this wouldn't have happened. You gave us the courage to fight back." Elena approached, a clipboard in hand. "The captives are accounted for and en route to the shelter. Medical teams will meet them halfway. She paused, her gaze drifting toward Alex. You did good. Alex. We all did. Alex's expression softened. But she didn't respond. Instead, her eyes followed the departing vehicles. A sense of quiet relief washing over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like something had truly been accomplished. The town square of Shadow Creek had become a gathering place. Its usual stillness replaced by a hum of activity. Residents mingled with members of Ghost Team and Alex's group, their faces reflecting a mixture of hope and disbelief. The cartel's stranglehold was gone, and the people of Shadow Creek were finally free to reclaim their lives. Carlos stood near a group of locals, his youthful energy infectious as he spoke about rebuilding. We can fix this, he said, gesturing toward the crumbling facade of the old diner. We'll make it better than it ever was. Maria's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she watched her nephew. He's found his purpose, she said quietly to Alex, who stood beside her. Alex nodded. He's strong. He'll do great things here. Maria's gaze shifted to Alex, her expression thoughtful. And what about you? What's next? Before Alex could answer, Mason's voice interrupted. Alex. Got a minute? Away from the bustling square, Mason led Alex to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. He leaned against a fence, his expression unusually serious. I've got something to run by you, he said. Alex crossed her arms, waiting for him to continue. The Joint Task Force, Mason said, his tone deliberate. We've been looking for someone to lead it. Someone with your experience, your drive. After everything we've seen here, I'm convinced you're the right person for the job. Alex's brows furrowed slightly. A leadership role? Mason nodded. You'd have full operational control. It's a global initiative to take down operations like this one, cartels, trafficking rings, the works. We need someone who knows what's at stake and isn't afraid to fight for it. Alex looked out at the valley, her thoughts swirling. The mission in Shadow Creek had reignited something in her. A sense of purpose she thought she'd lost. But the scars of Guatemala lingered. A reminder of the cost of this life. It's a lot to think about, she said finally. Mason gave her a small smile. Take your time. Just know that you're the best person for this. Alex. You've proven that. As the day wore on, Alex wandered through the town, taking in the signs of renewal. Residents were already beginning to repair buildings and clean up the remnants of the cartel's presence. Children played in the park, their laughter a sharp contrast to the somber atmosphere that had once blanketed Shadow Creek. She found Carlos near the church, working with a group of volunteers to clear debris. He looked up as she approached, his face lighting up with a smile. Alex, you should join us. We've got plenty of work to go around. Alex chuckled softly. I think you've got it covered. Carlos wiped his hands on his jeans, his expression growing serious. Thank you. For everything. You didn't have to come here. But you did. And because of you, we have a chance to start over. Alex placed a hand on his shoulder. You're the one who's going to make sure this town thrives. Don't let anyone take that from you. Carlos nodded, his resolve clear. I won't. That evening, the town gathered for an impromptu celebration. A bonfire crackled in the square, its warm light reflecting on the faces of those who had fought for Shadow Creek's freedom. Food and drinks were shared, laughter and music filling the air. Maria sat beside Alex, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. You know, I think this town might actually stand a chance now, she said with a smile. It will, Alex replied, her tone confident. You've got good people here. Maria studied her for a moment. And what about you? Where do you go from here? Alex hesitated. The weight of Mason's offer still fresh in her mind. I'm not sure yet. But wherever it is, I'll keep fighting. Maria nodded, her smile softening. You're a good person, Alex. Don't ever forget that. As the night wore on, Alex allowed herself a moment of peace, watching the flames dance against the dark sky. Shadow Creek was on its way to recovery. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had made a real difference. The early morning air was crisp and quiet, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the previous days. Alex stood at the edge of the town, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, watching the sun rise over the horizon. Each streak of light felt like a promise of renewal for Shadow Creek and for herself. Mason Hayes approached, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He stopped a few feet away, studying her in silence for a moment before speaking. You ready? Alex glanced at him, her expression unreadable. I think so. He nodded, his gaze steady. It's a big decision, but you don't strike me as someone who backs away from a challenge. Alex's lips curved into a faint smile. That obvious? Huh. Just a little. Mason replied with a smirk. His tone shifted, becoming more serious. The Joint Task Force needs someone like you. You've proven you can lead, make tough calls, and see things through. It's the kind of work that changes lives. Alex took a deep breath, her thoughts swirling. She had spent so much of her life fighting, and while the idea of stepping into another war was daunting, it was also invigorating. For the first time in years, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. What happens if I say yes? She asked. Mason's eyes lit with a mixture of pride and relief. You join the best of the best. We'll deploy globally, targeting operations like this one. You'll have the resources and support to make real change. But it's not easy, Alex. You know that. I do, Alex said, her voice steady. And I'm in. Mason extended his hand, a rare smile breaking across his face. Welcome aboard. Alex shook his hand firmly, a sense of purpose settling over her. Let's get to work. The helicopter's blades roared as they spun to life, kicking up a whirlwind of dust and debris. Alex stood at the edge of the helipad, her duffel bag resting at her feet. Mason was already aboard, speaking to one of the pilots as the rest of Ghost Team prepared for departure. Maria and Carlos approached, their faces a mixture of pride and sadness. Maria was the first to speak, her voice filled with emotion. You've done more for this town than anyone ever could. Thank you, Alex. Alex turned to face her, a soft smile playing on her lips. You don't have to thank me. You and Carlos, you're the heart of this place. Shadow Creek will thrive because of you. Carlos stepped forward, his youthful energy tempered by the weight of the past few days. We'll make you proud. I promise. I have no doubt, Alex said, her voice steady. She glanced back at the helicopter, the rotors kicking up a gust of wind. Take care of each other, and keep fighting for what matters. Maria pulled her into a tight embrace, her voice barely above a whisper. You're one of us now, Alex. Don't forget that. As Alex stepped back, she met Carlos's gaze. Stay strong, kid. You've got this. He nodded, his resolve clear. Take care, Alex. The helicopter lifted off, its powerful engines drowning out the world below. Alex watched as Shadow Creek grew smaller in the distance, the town's humble buildings and winding streets fading into the landscape. She allowed herself a moment of reflection, the weight of her decision settling in. Mason sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "Leaving doesn't get easier," he said. "But it's the right call." Alex nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I know. There's still so much to do." Mason leaned forward, his tone earnest. "And now you'll have the chance to do it. This is just the beginning. Alex, we're going to change the game." For the first time in a long time, Alex felt a flicker of hope. The mission in Shadow Creek had shown her that change was possible, even in the darkest corners of the world. She tightened her grip on her duffel bag, her resolve solidifying. "Let's make it count," she said, her voice filled with determination. Mason grinned, his confidence infectious. "We will." As the helicopter flew toward its destination, Alex allowed herself to look forward, both literally and figuratively. The horizon stretched endlessly before her, a canvas of possibility waiting to be painted. For the first time in years, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The fight was far from over, but Alex Morgan was prepared. She had found her purpose, and she would see it through, one mission at a time. Alex chose to keep fighting, to stand against the darkness that threatens so many. Would you make the same choice? Or is there another path? Tell us what you do in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.